Hello and welcome to a special edition of The Big Fight, and it's special because on the panel today we've assembled what is for the big fight, the big fight equivalent of a constitutional bench of the Supreme Court, and that's because we're here to discuss a really important question about the judiciary. You do recall at the start of the year I said we will be doing a series of programs looking at various aspects of the judiciary. Today we would like to talk a bit about potential judicial overreach and judicial underreach. What exactly does that mean? Well, judicial overreach, which many people have been complaining about, happens when the judiciary starts taking decisions and getting into areas that others would argue are not really the areas that the judiciary should be ruling on. It should be done by the legislature, it should be done by the executive, it should be done by somebody else. Why is the judiciary getting into these areas? And I will give you some examples of where that might be happening. Just recently, and these are just some of the examples. You've had the case of the highways, the judiciary ruling that you can't have alcohol being served within 500 meters of the highway. That then rolled on and became a rather complex issue. What about restaurants? What about hotels? What about, how do you measure those 500 meters? That's just one example. The other examples, the judiciary talking about what should and should not be done with the BCCI. Is the judiciary therefore getting into running cricket in the country? That entire question came up. The same questions were raised when the judiciary said something about the national anthem and the fact that that should be made compulsory in the theatres. Eyebrows were raised. Is that the role of the judiciary? It happened when the judiciary just a couple of days back said that you shouldn't have a particular telecom tower. It may have led to cancer and therefore that should be shut down. People said that, is that something which the judiciary can really rule on? So that's the entire gamut of area to do with judicial overreach, and I'm sure we'll come up with more examples as we go along. And then you have potential judicial underreach. Certain times when the judiciary should be coming out, should be saying something, and should be making a decision, but it said it's really not up to us. Let's refer that back to the legislature and to the executive. There are examples that come to mind. Ayodhya, one possible example, where the judiciary said, let them talk among themselves and sort it out. Hadn't happened for 40 years. Can they really do it now? I'm not so sure. It happened in section 377, for example, where the judiciary said this is something for Parliament to rule on, and others said this is perhaps not some place where the Parliament will be able to rule. Maybe the judiciary should act on it. So I've given you the broad thrust of what it is that we would like to discuss. Now let's introduce what I call the big fight equivalent of the Constitution bench. First of all, it's a great privilege to have with us Soli Sorabji, almost certainly one of the top legal minds we have in the country, who will be helping us understand and interpret this. Joining us also from Singapore by Skype is Arvind Datar, who's just written a piece questioning some of these very factors that we've been taking a look at. It's a privilege to have with us Justice B.A. Khan, former Chief Justice of the Jammu and Kashmir High Court. It's a privilege, sir, to have you with us. Thank you so much for being with us. Helping us understand this from the political point of view are two people who've also had a major role to play in the law. Representing the BJP is Aman Sinha, is of course also a senior advocate at the court, so it's great to have you with us. And representing the Congress party, somebody who has been the Law Minister of India, Veerappa Moily. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Shekhar Gupta is with us as well here, who's been writing a lot about the judiciary and what it should do, as indeed Harsh Mander, writer and activist. And finally, to round off this Constitution bench, Satvik Verma, it's a privilege to have you with us as well. Thank you all so much for joining us. Actually, Arvind Datar, why don't I get you to kick this off? Would you like to spell out what your major concern is?
Yes, you spoke about judicial overreach and judicial underreach. Actually, the whole thing started because there was legislative underreach and executive underreach. Particularly, the executive was not implementing the laws in the areas of environment and pollution. The legislature was not doing adequately in the area of human rights. And that's where the Supreme Court stepped in and passed directions. The most common example is the Vishaka guidelines for preventing sexual harassment of women in workplaces. There was no legislation in place and the Supreme Court issued directions. Now, I won't call that judicial overreach. If the Supreme Court issues some directions to implement the pollution control laws, it is not judicial overreach. But what I wrote was that if there are certain laws in place, for example, if the prohibition laws of a state permit liquor to be sold in hotels which happen to be on highways which are part of the city itself, then I don't think the court should come in and say that you can't serve alcohol there. The second thing I want to say is that these kind of decisions, for example, the ban on diesel vehicles about 2000 cc or the ban on the telecom tower 2 days ago. Now, these kind of decisions create tremendous collateral damage, and the court does not have all the viewpoints before it. Now, just see what's happened in this highways ban on liquor. Look at the loss of 75,000 crores in excise revenue. People have there are hotels, you have had functions, you have receptions, you have programs lined up months ahead, and suddenly you just say that you can't serve liquor. And again, there is no empirical evidence that by banning liquor on highways, you're going to reduce deaths on highways.
Okay.
The deaths are caused by so many reasons.
Mr. Soli Sarabji, you've of course also been Attorney General of India. What's your take, sir, on this entire issue?
If there is legislative inaction, executive apathy, which results in violation of the fundamental rights of the people, then the Supreme Court may well intervene. I don't think you can call it overreach, provided there's a clear case of the citizens' rights being affected by executive inaction.
Are there times when the judiciary is stepping into areas which are actually something which really it's for the executive to do, and maybe the executive is trying to do it? Where do you draw the line between when the judiciary can and cannot step in?
Judiciary does have no business to step in to enforce any moral code or moral values. As the real test is, are the rights, fundamental rights of the people being affected because of executive inaction, because of legislative inaction? Then the judiciary may well have a role, of course. But that depends on the mindset of the judges also.
Okay.
You can't draw a distinct line. It all depends on the facts of each case.
Justice Khan, if I may come to you now. How do you see the balance being played? It's a tough balancing act that the judiciary has to do.
No, Vikram, I don't think that this impression of overreach is correct. See, we follow under constitutional scheme a doctrine of separation powers, not in that rigidity as Montesquieu had propounded it, but there are spheres of jurisdiction for all limbs of the state provided. Now, as far as judiciary is concerned, it has been conferred a power of judicial review of all actions taken by the legislature and the executive to keep it within the constitutional bounds.
Right.
The judiciary is a watchdog which keeps them both limbs within the constitutional bounds. Now, while exercising the judicial power, there is no length or reach provided. Now, how is it being alleged that this is an overreach? Now, there has to be some reach provided, but that is not to say that judiciary is empowered.
There's no specific bounds that are provided.
No, look at it how it happened. A citizen knocks at the doors of the judiciary with a cause. Let's take, for example, pollution in Delhi. And he claims that a large section of the society's health and well-being is affected by this kind of a thing, and the executive for the last decades has not been able to do anything on this. Now, we in the judiciary, we don't straight away take an action on this. We first ensure whether this has a jurisprudential basis. Means what? Means whether it arises out of any legal position. And what is the legal position here? When a constitutional court, in exercise of judicial review under Article 226 to 32, finds that this thing is affecting the life and well-being and health of the people, the matter falls under Article 21.
Okay.
When matter falls under Article 21, higher judiciary is empowered to take action. When higher judiciary takes an action, now some people feel aggrieved and they think that it's an overreach.
There are other executive and legislative complexities that frankly at that time or the other the bench may or may not have full awareness of knowledge of. Like for example the 500-meter the way this 500 meters is going to be implemented. There are other issues. There's what will be the impact on pollution, what's going to be the impact on tourism, how is that actually going to be worked, which is the way it is going to be circumvented, how will it be enforced on the ground. Some of that require executive knowledge, and it's the state governments which may have to actually get into it. It cannot always be said by the Supreme Court.
Frankly, some of it also requires executive accountability, because judiciary, once the judges have given this order, have no accountability. Now, if state after state denotifies their highways and the same thing starts, the judges have given their order and brought in the perfect world. So my problem is something else. My argument with the judiciary with respect is as follows. There is no questioning the good intention of the judiciary, as Judge Saab says. They do all this with right intentions. But there is a limited number of judges, there is a limited number of courts. Most importantly, the judiciary, it is our most respected institution. We need it at a time when I believe that our freedoms are under some assault, and this will increase because there is a certain kind of thinking which says that too much liberty is not good. Right? At that time, because judiciary has, besides limited number of judges and courts, has limited political and judicial capital, limited moral capital. It has to employ this very carefully.
Do it in the right area is what you're saying. Also, and that's going to bring me to the judicial underreach position, because there are other areas where you may feel the judiciary should have done more.
If I may have half a minute, do it in the areas when you can really make a difference. Now, judiciary has been working on pollution in Delhi, almost to the exception of the rest of India. Has air quality in Delhi improved? The same people who've been sitting on the Delhi Pollution Committee have been sitting for 20 years. Now, nobody votes. Judges don't go out to seek a vote. So you cannot say that I will do something because mujhe kuch karna hai. You have to see what is it that you can do.
And that's why you need to get the politicians.
Because the executive is very clever. Politicians are very clever.
In circumventing.
Not circumventing. Politicians say, inko is baat mein busy rakho. So they'll forget all the other stuff and let them make fools of themselves.
Focus on the right.
Because nothing will happen.
Justice can't focus on the right areas.
No,
because he's right, the judiciary is hard pressed. There's a shortage of
Firstly, there's nobody who is prepared to become a fool in the judiciary, and nor can they be fooled around by any executive action. See,
that executive inaction, because they'll wait now. They'll wait for everybody to get around this liquor law.
See, I understand cases where judiciary may indulge in some recklessness. I understand cases where judiciary may go totally haywire. For example, in a case like this 500 meter, why not 5,000 meter? Why not 1 kilometer?
The other cases, there's been, for example, in the south, it's been said that you must have a loan waiver. Now, the judiciary can't say loan waiver.
Sir, but our system has ample safeguards, checks and balances. And judiciary starts with what? Judiciary starts with issuing a direction to the executive, please look into it.
Okay.
Now, it is open to the executive to come, and this, for example, this 500 meter business is foolish, absurd.
All right.
And judiciary will rectify it.
For a prolonged period of time, you've been a minister, you were the law minister also. And during the time of the UPA, it was quite often said, and that's, I think, partly what was being referred to also by Arvind Datar. Initially, there was a perception that the state is not always acting. The government doesn't act on the judiciary. There's a vacuum, and the judiciary therefore has to step in.
Yes, judiciary has some limitations.
Okay.
What is going on on the ground, and whether they have adequate and enough inputs to adjudicate on a particular matter before them. Just because on the fanciful observation or understanding of things, if the decision is taken, on the ground it may definitely, will go to show that, they are ultimately executive and the legislation, they have a big jurisdiction to understand things, get the inputs and take right decision. And having obtained that, if legislature or the executive, they have not applied their mind, and then of course the judiciary can definitely step in.
So first
and
at the executive
on some of these matters, for example, there are even when I was CM, I tried to put the limits on these highway liquor shops, and I did implement it, but subsequent government removed it. That means to say that sometimes the executive may not be in a position, or legislation may not be in a position to take objective view on certain matters, then again the judiciary should intervene.
At the end of the day, so long as it's not really violating fundamental rights, there will be those who will argue that we have won an election. We are the elected representatives of the people. Therefore, we have the right to take a decision. Should there be prohibition? Should there not be prohibition? What should happen? What should not happen? These are our decisions. Should there be a loan waiver? Should there not be a loan waiver? These are political decisions. We have been elected to do it.
I would agree with Mr. Sorabji that it is not a case of either judicial overreach or underreach. There may be cases of judicial activism or judicial restraint, but it's not a case of judicial overreach. And activism sometimes is desirable in the sense that you have some positive affirmative direction coming up from the court which ensures some remedial measures. And so therefore that cannot be condemned as something which is negative. Similarly, there are several cases of judicial restraint also, which do not come into prominence in that manner. The Chief Justice of India, the number 2 Justice Deepak Mishra, they have all had judgments whereby they have propounded and expounded on the theory of judicial restraint also. As far as executive is concerned, executive is doing its duty as it is prescribed in the constitution. And I believe that in past 60-65 years, all three organs have worked in a good harmony. Obviously, there will be times when there will be institutional...
Can I just play for you something that Nitin Gadkari, last week after this order came, the Minister Nitin Gadkari and others, there are those in the government, I'll play this for you right.
सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने भी अपने फैसले सुनाए हैं, जैसे उन्होंने कहा है कि 500 मीटर्स तक कहीं शराब नहीं बेची जा सकती है. उससे भी काफी विवाद हुआ है. टूरिज्म इंडस्ट्री कह रही है कि भाई 10 लाख लोगों की नौकरी जा सकती है. इस पर भी काफी चर्चा.
अभी तो ये कोर्ट का निर्णय है, उसका तो हम लोग सम्मान करते हैं. एक निर्णय आया कि समुद्र के तीर पर 500 मीटर है, वहां कुछ मत करो. फिर आया कि रोड पर 500 मीटर कुछ मत करो. फिर आया लेक के बाजू में कुछ मत करो. फिर आया फॉरेस्ट के बाजू में कुछ मत करो. तो आखिर ये इससे सब अनेक प्रश्न समस्याएं खड़ी हुई है. और मुझे लगता है कि इन सब बातों को गंभीरता से सोचना होगा. हम कोर्ट के निर्णय का सम्मान भी करते हैं, पर उसके साथ साथ इससे कारण बहुत सी समस्याएं खड़ी हुई, उसके साथ भी सोचना होगा और मार्ग निकालना होगा.
Judiciary only implemented certain advisories which were given by center, as Mr. Moily was also pointing out. There were advisories given by the union government in the past. The state governments could not implement it. There was some problem with that. If implementation happened in the next regime, it was changed. So therefore, there were certain difficulties. But it has to be appreciated that executive and judiciary both are largely working in harmony. And if there is any institutional discourse or deliberation which happen, it should not be taken as a discord.
Satvik?
Vikram, I think there's a couple of different points. I think there seems to be this tussle to try and establish supremacy of one limb of government over another. There's always this tussle that the executive has more powers than the legislature, and the executive and the judiciary has an overreach, and the judiciary, invariably gets blamed for a lot of things. I don't think that blame is a correct blame. As Mr. Sorabji said, it's important for us to bear in mind, just give me a minute, it's important for us to bear in mind on a case-to-case basis. In a democratic country like ours, we all need to bear in mind, all of us, all citizens, that it is actually the constitution and the rule of law that is supreme. Nothing else is supreme. And in that context, it is equally important that when a judicial order is passed, and I think you touched upon it, that when a judicial order is passed, fundamental to the rule of law is also the fact that orders must be capable of being implemented. They must be capable of being followed both by the states and at the executive level. I'll give you an example of what Mr. Shekhar Gupta talked about. Pollution in Delhi has been a focus, but it was because of all of the efforts of a former Chief Justice of India that CNG buses were introduced for the first time. Otherwise, we would have been in a further dismal state. Was that judicial overreach? Why is it that we don't question when the judiciary decides that prior to the monsoon season, dengue issues need to be resolved? Every year this happens.
No, a lot
the High Court last year passed an issue.
A large number, let's not forget, the vast majority of judicial decisions and judicial interventions are, nobody can even question them. They're coming in, they're doing their job.
Just the judiciary is saying before the monsoon to the executive that be careful, dengue is coming, do something about mosquitoes, is writing people like us writing editorials. Right? This is motherhood and apple pie. Judiciary, can judiciary be on the ground implementing this? I mean, then if you
So, but
still
who
find
will?
no, no.
I ask you this question every year before the onslaught of the winter.
So-
the shelters that the government is required to have in place are not there. Now, if a person goes and says the shelter should be there, is it not an extension of the right to life under the Constitution for the judiciary to give directions?
Don't mix things. I
No,
know
it's
you are
the
a
same as
lawyer,
the dengue
but don't
issue.
mix things. To have shelters is a part of right to life, but to say
So is dengue, sir.
No, but dengue, people are elected.
dengue is not part of the
people
right
are
to life.
elected to be protected for dengue. If politicians don't protect them, they'll be voted out. Judges.
Okay.
See, the problem is judges will say, executive chief secretary of Delhi will come say, your lordship, I'll do it. He'll do nothing. So what have the judges done? हमने order दे दिया. So it's like Mr. Modi's famous story about Sonia Gandhi's rights laws, which my friend supports. That this fellow, this gentleman is going through a forest, and a lion comes from the front, and he says, मैं तुम्हें गोली मार दूंगा, मेरे पास gun है. So lion says, निकालो gun. तो बोलता है gun नहीं है, मुझे सोनिया जी ने एक license दिया है. Right? Right to food, right to health, right to education. So this is like that. Judges have served their conscience by saying we issued orders. Mosquitoes should be killed.
Justice Khan, hang on. Harsh, I'm going to promise I'm going to come to you. Justice Khan wants to say something. I'm going to come back to Arvind.
I don't expect coming it from Mr. Shekhar.
I'd like to come in.
Mr. Shekhar Gupta.
Yeah, I'm just coming to you, sorry.
What harm does it cause if judiciary pushes the executive to take an action?
Sir, they are not pushed.
No, how can what is the question of they are get pushed only by the judiciary?
Language.
Since they are in their deep slumber, would you be watching the scene when people die of dengue? Okay. And if some court pushes the executive to take some action, what is the harm? What is the last cause?
But the judiciary can pass orders, but you have to see that if, for example, tomorrow the judiciary, somebody was to come out, for example, and saying, yes, there should be loan waivers all across the country. I mean, so far not, they haven't said it. Only one court somewhere said it. Or all towers should be shut down, not just that one tower, but all towers should be shut down everywhere in the country. How are those going to be practically
is fanciful, is capable of non-implementation,
yeah, so
will not sustain because we have checks and balances.
Okay, so
the higher superior court will strike it down.
But what if the Supreme
because
Court
it comes from nowhere.
At the end of the day,
the Supreme Court bench with the Chief Justice gives an order. Who will strike it down?
The implementation of anything that the courts say, that again then comes back to the executive.
About sexual harassment of women at the workplace. Now, there was no law on the subject, but because of that phenomenon of harassment, the women's rights under Article 21 were being violated. So can you say the Supreme Court had no business to give orders? And to say about the sexual harassment, how should be dealt with? You see, it all depends, as I said, on the facts of a case. Sometimes the judges may go haywire. For example, they can't say trains are not running on time,
Yes.
the roads are not in good condition, but where it results in a violation.
Right.
For example, in this case which I gave you, Vishaka, gender equality, then I think the Supreme Court interferes, and rightly so.
And because if I may add to what Mr. Sorabji is saying, despite the Vishaka judgment, it took almost a decade for the law to be promulgated.
Okay.
Despite that, which is underreach.
Arvind?
The main problem lies in two areas. One is where the Supreme Court or the High Court passes a judgment which makes illegal what is legal. For example, this 500-meter rule, or the ban on diesel vehicles, or the ban on telecom towers. Now, these are all commercial activities which are perfectly legal under a particular statute, but by virtue of a court order, they overnight become illegal. Now, that, according to me, should not be done at all. The other point I want to make is the court should not issue policy directions like levy of a diesel cess or directing governments to grant loan waivers. I think if we if the courts steer clear of these two areas, then I think the entire problem will be solved and there will be no allegation of judicial overreach.
Okay.